Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Justin Haskins Show. My name is Justin Haskins. Thank you for joining me. We have really great news. The Trump administration over the weekend hammered out an incredible trade deal, one of the best trade deals I have ever seen with the European Union. We're going to break down all of the incredible victories, the stuff that's in this EU trade deal with the United States. Just absolutely mind-blowingly good stuff in the trade deal. But before we get into that, a quick call to action. Please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, hit that notifications button if you're watching on YouTube so that you get notified when new videos are posted. All of these things are going to help break through big tech algorithms that hold content like this back. It doesn't cost any money, just a few moments of your time, and it makes a huge impact on the channel. So please subscribe to the channel. It's still a pretty new channel, so we need as many subscribers as we can get. All right, let's dive straight into today's topic. We're talking about a new trade deal announced by the Trump administration. The Trump administration, of course, has been negotiating trade deals with countries all over the world in an extremely aggressive way, something that we haven't seen from a U.S. president in many, many, many decades. But I think that this is the biggest one. This trade deal that just recently happened between the United States and the European Union is just, it is incredible. It is incredibly good for the United States. And it is embarrassingly bad from the perspective of the European Union. Just a catastrophe for the European Union. Great deal for the United States. And so just a huge victory for the president and for the entire country. So I want to break down some of the details that are in the trade agreement so you can get a sense of what's going on. I'm not going to dive into every single element of the trade deal. It's a big one, and there's a lot of things to talk about, but I do want to hit on the highlights of it. So the first thing that, I think that one of the biggest takeaways from the trade deal is that there's going to be a flat 15% tariff on all EU goods. Okay, so about 15% on most EU goods, not on everything. We'll get into some of the details of that, but a 15% tariff on EU goods coming into the United States, which is going to make American manufacturers more competitive compared to EU manufacturers. So you might be thinking, okay, well then, but what is the tariff that American manufacturers have to pay in Europe? And the answer is nothing. Nothing. So 15% tariff on manufacturers in the EU and effectively nothing for US manufacturers. It's just that in and of itself, absolutely incredible. The 15% tariff is something that it's actually a little bit of a downgrade from what had been threatened previously by the Trump administration. It's going to include, this is just one example of it. The 15% tariff is applied to just about, to the vast majority of things. That includes automobiles and auto parts. There had previously been, it was like around 25% tariff. I think it was 27.5% tariff placed on auto parts and foreign cars produced in the EU. Now that's down to 15%. So that helps EU car manufacturers overseas. So like your BMWs and things like that. 15% is also lower than the 20% reciprocal tariff. The reciprocal meaning the Trump administration had basically said that we're going to apply a 20% tariff on basically everything because you guys have these big tariffs on US products. That was floated earlier in the year. And now it's down to 15% from the EU's perspective, things are getting better, I guess is the point in the deal than what Trump had threatened previously. But remember, 15% is a lot higher than what it previously was for the United States. Previously, or I should say 15% is a lot higher than what it previously was for the EU. EU manufacturers were in the past paying around 2.5% tariff to send products to the US. Now it's up to 15% for the vast majority of things. There's going to temporarily be a 0% tariff on pharmaceuticals and semiconductors and some other things. But there are some investigations that have to go on before that is 100% finalized. So there are some sector specific tariffs related to pharmaceuticals, semiconductors, timber, copper, and things like that, the tariffs are not going to exceed 15% for the EU on those things. So they could be less than that, could be less than 15%. Steel and aluminum, 50% tariff on steel and aluminum right now. That stays in effect, but there's going to be a transition to a different kind of model that's going to be negotiated in the future. Well, it's being negotiated right now, but it hasn't gone totally into place. So the 50% tariff is going to stay in place for steel and aluminum. That's going to help American steel manufacturers. Then there's a whole bunch of 0 for 0 tariff exclusions. So that means no tariffs. The EU manufacturers aren't going to pay any tariffs, and American manufacturers aren't going to pay any tariffs either. So aircraft and aircraft components, various chemicals and drugs, pharmaceuticals. I mentioned semiconductors earlier. That's another thing. Various raw earth minerals and things like that that are produced in both countries. So there is some agricultural products that are included in this, but not necessarily everything. So beef, rice, ethanol, sugar, and poultry, chicken is excluded, and wine and things like that, which is actually a really kind of a hot topic for the EU because they export a ton of wine in places like from France and Italy and places like that. That's still being negotiated, so that still needs to be worked out. But all in all, when you're just looking at the tariff aspect of how the deal shaped up, you gotta say, I mean, the U.S. came out huge on top. I mean, it's just absolutely massive win for the Trump administration. 15% tariffs. That's increased revenue for the United States government coming in, and U.S. manufacturers now are able to export their products to the EU without any tariffs being imposed on them in most cases, not necessarily everything, but in a lot of cases. And so the U.S. is getting a huge advantage over the EU in this trade deal. In addition to that, that's not the only thing that's in here. It's not just about tariffs. There's also an agreement for there to be strategic purchases and energy realignment. The EU is agreeing to spend $750 billion in various strategic U.S. purchases industries. This is related mainly to energy. So oil, liquefied natural gas. So by liquefying natural gas, you're able to send natural gas over long distances by boat and things like that. And nuclear technology, $750 billion. And the goal of this from the European Union's perspective, because you would say, well, why is the EU agreeing to do that? They're buying all of this energy from America. I mean, why would they agree to do that? Well, because they're completely dependent, not completely dependent, they're heavily dependent on Russia for a lot of their energy needs. And that has been a huge problem in this conflict with Ukraine. It's one of the main reasons why Russia has been able to continue the war. To some degree, the European Union is helping to finance the war in Ukraine while simultaneously being totally opposed to it because they rely on Russian energy in a number of EU countries. So now the goal here, and the goal for the EU, this has been the case for a while, is to get away from Russia, but to go where? How do we get the energy that we need? Well, the United States under Joe Biden did not take advantage of this opportunity to the degree that they should have because they're completely opposed to fossil fuels, which is insane, but they are. So the Trump administration obviously is not. They're very pro affordable energy. So this deal will allow the EU to shift away from Russia, which is good for everybody, and it will provide $750 billion, $750 billion in spending in oil, liquefied natural gas, and nuclear technology here in the US. So big win for the energy industry in the US, and a big win for the free world, frankly, because it is insane that the European Union is relying on Russia. It is just totally insane that they're doing that. And that's something the Trump administration has been complaining about for many, many years, going back to the first administration, the very first time that Trump was in office, beginning in 2017. It was insane then, and it's even more insane now. So hopefully that's going to be fixed. So there's $600 billion. So in addition to everything we've talked about, $600 billion in new EU investment is projected. This is private investment. This isn't government investment, but $600 billion invested in the U.S. from EU companies. There's military and semiconductor commitments. So the EU countries are agreeing to purchase U.S. military equipment. There hasn't been a dollar amount provided at this point in time. Semiconductor, the U.S. is going to become Europe's preferred supplier for chips. So that's a big win. This is expected to go beyond the $750 billion deal that we already talked about. So again, all of this is a massive, massive, massive victory for the Trump administration and for the American people. The European Union got railroaded on this in the most embarrassing way, possible. I mean, this was truly a catastrophic trade deal for the European Union. So the question you got to ask yourself is, and I think this is a really, why would the European Union agree to this deal? 15% tariffs on EU manufacturers, or not necessarily manufacturers, but EU imports into the United States, a 15% tariff, up from like around 2.5%. But US manufacturers, exporters, they're sending stuff over to Europe, they don't have to pay anything on a whole bunch of products and services. Why would the EU agree to that? Hundreds of billions of dollars in new investment. We become the primary source of their energy needs. That's a good thing for them, but not when you factor in that they're losing big time on the tariffs. This was a bad deal for the EU and a really good deal for the United States. The EU they don't love Donald Trump. They don't love Donald Trump over there. They really don't. The head of the European Union, Ursula von der Leyen, or whatever her name is, like Ursula doesn't like Donald Trump. So why did this happen? How did this happen? I think that this is actually a really incredible moment in history. I think that historians, it's possible, might look back at this trade deal and say, this is the moment. You can see the moment when the European Union became so utterly weak and pathetic and dropped down a notch. That's how bad this deal is. And the reason the EU took the deal is because they had no choice but to take the deal, because they're in a really bad economic situation. Not only do they have this crisis in Ukraine that they're still dealing with, involving Russia, and not only has that been incredibly expensive for them in terms of the amount of investments they've had to make in that war and just the energy costs and inflation and everything, but just the toll that it's taken on the psyche of the EU and the fear, and now they have to increase defense spending and all of that. I mean, it's just been a disaster for them on that front. And the European Union's policies, high taxes, high regulations, big, gigantic social programs, they've been proven to be completely and utterly ineffective. Businesses in the European Union have been fleeing the EU now for more than a decade, and they've been going elsewhere in the world. They've been coming to the United States. Some have been going to the developing world. A lot of stuff has been moving over to China. Obviously, this is a problem for America too, but not to the degree that we've seen in the European Union. The European Union has witnessed a mass exodus of a lot of money, and because of that, you're not seeing innovative new products and services come out of the European Union. When was the last time you heard about a brand new, innovative, technological, a world-changing product or service that came out of the EU? Almost never. This never happens. It's coming out of China, or it's coming out of America, or it's coming out of the Middle East, certain parts of the Middle East, like the United Arab Emirates, or whatever, maybe even certain areas of South America and stuff. Every once in a while, you see something like that, but you're not seeing the European Union. You're just not seeing it there. You're not seeing innovation. You're not seeing any. And this was the center of the world for so long, for hundreds and hundreds of years. This is where new breakthrough technologies, where scientific discoveries, this is where they came from. This is where religion and art and philosophy and all this was the epicenter of all of that. The wealth of the world, the epicenter of trade in the world. It was all in the European, what is now the European Union, but Europe, that was where all of it. And now we see it is in serious economic decline. They've got issues with all kinds of immigration problems. They've got, the wars. There's so many problems that they have in the European Union. I was reading this article over at Fox News by Liz Peek, and I wanted to share it with you because there's a particular statistic in here that Liz Peek talks about, and I think it's just incredible. She talks a lot in here about the advantages of the trade deal and everything, and I agree with all of that. She calls it the granddaddy of all trade deals with the EU. I like that. I think that's true. I mean, this is one of the best trade deals I've ever seen. But she also, there's also a quote in here. I might as well bring this up now. As it is, the deal was widely panned by European officials and economists with I'm not even going to try to say this, obstreperous French leading the way. Liz Peek's too smart for me. French Prime Minister Francois Bayrou furiously denounced the pact, meaning the trade agreement, describing it as, quote, submission, unquote. French Trade Minister Laurent Saint-Martin said he did not want Paris, quote, to settle with what happened yesterday because that would be accepting that Europe is not an economic power. It isn't an economic power. It's over. It's over. I'm sorry, Laurent. It's however you say your name. It's over, man. It's done. It's done. It is over. It is over. And Liz Peek points this out. Here's a news flash for French politicians nipping at von der Leyen's ankles. Ursula von der Leyen is the head of the European Union. Europe isn't much of an economic power. This is the stat that I wanted to show you. The World Bank reports that from 2008 to 2023, European Union GDP, gross domestic product, that's how a lot of economists measure the growth of economies. Gross domestic product grew by 13.5% in the European Union from 2008 to 2023. So that is what, 15 years? From 16.37 trillion to 18.59 trillion, while US GDP rose by 87% from 14.77 trillion to 27.72 trillion. In addition, EU GDP per capita as a percentage of US GDP per capita fell from 76.5% in 2008 to 50% in 2023. That is downright embarrassing. Yes, it is. It is downright embarrassing. And that is exactly the point. The EU, 13.5% growth in 15 years. America, 87% growth over the same time period. Now, you can't just go by GDP numbers. I know that, but I mean, that's bad. That's really bad. And when you factor in the war and you factor in the fact that they've become totally dependent on foreigners for their energy because they went all in on green energy in a lot of parts of Europe. Green energy has been a disaster for them. They've had to restart power plants in some places, old power plants, because it turns out the wind doesn't always blow and the sun doesn't always shine. So windmills and solar panels are not going to solve all your problems. It's been a catastrophe for the EU, a catastrophe. And as a result of it, they've had to accept this trade deal from the United States, the Trump administration, that is completely favorable to America and completely unfavorable to the EU. And this is a win for us, but it's a total disaster for them. But they have to do it. They have no choice because they need us for the war in Ukraine, and they need us to get off of Russian energy. They're hooked on Russian energy, and they got to get off of it. And so they basically gave in an, as Liz Peek said, an embarrassing way. It's just a catastrophe for them because their embarrassing lack of economic growth has, in addition to all the other problems, has put them in a horrible negotiating position. And Donald Trump, a master negotiator, whether you like him or not, that is just a fact. He is taking advantage of it. Now, these things have been true for a while. So why didn't the Biden administration take advantage of it? Why didn't we see this happen with him? Because again, this has been the case because the Biden administration the Biden administration wanted America to become more like Europe. They didn't want to try to negotiate an America first deal with the European Union. They were perfectly fine with the EU imposing a whole bunch of tariffs on US manufacturers while we here in the US had our markets flooded with products and services that were barely paying any tariffs at all. Right? They were totally fine with the trade imbalance, is what I'm saying. Or not even a trade imbalance, but an imbalance in the tariff rate. They were fine with that. They were fine, the Biden administration and the left generally, which and it didn't always used to be this way, was fine with the EU stomping all over us, even though they had no leverage, putting our manufacturers and exporters at a huge disadvantage when that didn't need to happen. They were fine with it because they didn't care. They just did not care about Americans. They didn't care. They cared about what their friends would think at cocktail parties in Davos. That's what they cared about. And it shows because Trump comes in and within 6-7 months, we've got an incredible trade deal with the EU. They gave in right away. Absolutely incredible stuff. I have a lot more to say about all of this. There's other aspects to this that we need to get into. We need to talk about the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, the CSDDD. That's the EU ESG scheme that the European Union has cooked up. We need to talk about that. We got to talk about what's going on with the war in Ukraine and the future of all that and where Trump stands with it. But for this episode, I think that we should just take the win. We should be happy as Americans. This was a great deal for American manufacturers, a great deal for the American economy, a horrible deal for Europe, and they deserve it. They deserve it because their policies have been catastrophic, and this is the only way that you learn to stop having catastrophically bad and stupid policies. You have to learn the hard way. It's going to be painful. And I think that if you're the European Union as the trade, as the government in France, as those officials in France, as I mentioned earlier, said, if we accept this, it means accepting that the European Union is not really the power that it once was economically. And so we can't accept this, but sorry, that's the deal. That's the deal. And you're not the power that you once were, and you did it to yourselves. If you go back 20, 30 years, the EU was in a pretty good position to expand relative to what was going on in the United States. They had their issues, they had their problems, no doubt about it, but they were much closer to us back then than we are now. And they did it to themselves. They shot themselves in the foot. They've been destroying their economy there for decades, and it's only getting worse now. It's been accelerating in the last 10 years, and the Trump administration is coming and saying, we're not subsidizing your crap anymore. We're not just going to give you a blank check for wars, for endless wars. You're going to have to make a good deal with us because we're primarily here in America concerned about American manufacturers. And I think that's completely, and American consumers and American businesses of all kinds. And that's exactly what this trade deal reflects. So a huge win for the Trump administration. More details still to come. But until next time, my name is Justin Haskins. Thank you for watching. Again, please like the video, subscribe, leave a comment. All these things are going to help more people see the video. Until next time, stay free.